Dakota Territory, October 1886. While neighbors huddled around failing fires, one Norwegian widow's cabin stayed 21 degrees warmer. Measured, recorded, undeniable. Water froze solid in buckets, just feet from roaring stoves throughout the township. Children woke with blue lips. The elderly gasped for breath in air so cold it burned their lungs. Families burned through cord after cord of precious firewood and still shivered beneath every blanket they owned. But inside Ingrid Larsson's cabin, the cabin they had called foolish, the cabin they had mocked as excessive water, remained liquid through the night. No frost touched the interior walls. The morning fire rekindled from coals that had lasted since midnight. The difference was not luck. It was not divine intervention. It was physics applied by a woman who understood what experienced frontiersmen had dismissed. Before winter ended, 11 people would shelter in her small cabin. Among them, the very men who had wagered she would fail. What did a 34-year-old widow grasp about wind, dead air, and heat loss that an entire township of veteran homesteaders had refused to see? The springtime mud of Dakota Territory clung to Ingrid Larsson's boots as she stepped down from the freight wagon. April 1886. The wind carried the smell of thawing earth and new grass. Around her the plains stretched endless and indifferent, under a sky so vast it seemed to press down on the land itself. She was 34 years old, a widow, alone. 2 trunks held everything she owned. One contained clothes, quilts, and her husband's tools. The other carried something heavier than iron or wood. It carried memory. The land office clerk in Jamestown had looked at her papers with poorly concealed doubt. "Ma'am, winter kills men out here. You certain about this claim?" Ingrid had met his eyes without flinching. "I am Norwegian. We know winter." But knowing winter and surviving it were different things. She knew this better than anyone. The memory came unbidden, as it always did. Bergen, Norway, December 1884. 2 years ago, but it might have been yesterday. The cabin had been well built by local standards. Good timber, tight chinking. Henrik had been proud of his work. He was a skilled man, her husband. Strong hands, patient temperament. He worked at the ice house on the harbor where they stored winter ice through the summer heat. He understood insulation, or thought he did. Their son Thomas was 3 years old. Bright eyes, quick laugh. He loved when his father lifted him onto his shoulders. The winter came early that year. By mid-December, the temperatures had dropped to brutal lows. The wind of the North Sea cut through the valley like a blade. Henrik kept the fire burning. He was diligent about it, but the cold crept in anyway, seeping through gaps they could not see, stealing warmth faster than the stove could replace it. Ingrid woke at 3 in the morning. The fire had gone out. Henrik lay beside her, his breathing shallow and labored. She reached for Thomas in his small bed against the wall. His skin was ice. She had screamed then. Screamed until her throat was raw. Screamed until neighbors came running. But Thomas was already gone. And Henrik, weakened by the cold, his lungs damaged by frigid air, followed him within 2 days. The doctor said it was the cold, the sustained cold, the kind that got into the lungs and chest and would not let go. A warmer home might have saved them, he had said, not unkindly, just stating fact. Ingrid had stood over their graves in the frozen ground and made a vow. Never again. She would never let cold claim another life if she had the knowledge to prevent it. And she did have knowledge. Henrik had taught her. In their years together, working beside him at the ice house, she had learned the principles. Dead air, insulation, thermal barriers, how to trap cold inside thick walls so it could not escape even in July heat. If those principles could preserve cold, they could preserve warmth. The physics did not change. Only the application. So she had sold everything, taken her widow's portion, bought passage to America, come to Dakota Territory, where land was available and a woman could stake a claim if she had the courage. The courage she had. What she needed now was time, and the will to face down an entire community that would not believe her. By late June, Ingrid had her log cabin up. 14 feet by 18 feet. 9-foot walls of trimmed cottonwood chinked tight with clay and prairie grass. It was solid work, good work. Her neighbors, such as they were on this scattered frontier, had nodded approval. The nearest homestead belonged to Silas Blackwood, the road overseer. He was 45, weathered by 7 Dakota winters, with the confident bearing of a man who knew this land. He had stopped by twice during construction to observe her progress. "Fine cabin, Mrs. Larson. You've got a good hand with the tools." "My husband taught me." "Well, he taught you right. This'll see you through." But Ingrid was not done. And when she began setting cedar pickets in the ground 36 inches apart, forming a perfect rectangle, 12 inches outside her cabin walls, Silas Blackwood's approval turned to confusion. It was mid-July when he rode up during his weekly rounds and found her nailing ledger blocks between the pickets. "Mrs. Larson." He dismounted, walked the perimeter of her peculiar construction. "What in creation are you building now?" Ingrid did not pause in her work. The plumb bob hung true against the picket. She adjusted a block, drove another nail. "Storm wall, like the ice houses in Bergen." Silas spat tobacco juice and shook his head. "That's a fence around a house. You're wasting good lumber, ma'am. In Bergen, the ice houses have double walls. Sawdust between them keeps the ice frozen through summer. This ain't summer ice, Mrs. Larson. This is a dwelling. That cabin you built is solid. Tight chinking is all you need." She looked at him then, really looked at him, saw the certainty in his face, the absolute conviction that he understood frontier survival better than any Norwegian widow ever could. "I will build it anyway, Mr. Blackwood." He studied her for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "Your lumber, your time. But winter's coming, and you've got a lot of work ahead if you mean to survive out here." He rode off, and Ingrid returned to her measuring and cutting. By early August, word had spread through the township. The Norwegian widow was building something peculiar. People rode out to see for themselves. The outer skin went up in vertical planks, rough sawn 1x10 boards that she had ordered special from the Jamestown mill. She ran them floor to eave 20 feet of lumber per plank. At every seam, she nailed 1x3 battens spaced 16 to 18 inches apart for true coverage. At the roofline, she built a small overhang and flashed it with thin sheeting to shed snow melt away from the cavity between the walls. Under the eaves, she left a half-inch vent slot. Air needed to escape. Moisture needed to escape. She had learned this from Henrik watching him maintain the ice house vents. At the base, she left a 3/4-inch drainage gap and covered it with woven wire to hold whatever fill material she would stuff into that 12-inch space. The whole framework took her 4 days of careful measuring and cutting, and by then word had spread through the township that the Norwegian was building something peculiar. The school teacher came by in early August. Her name was Cordelia Hayes. She was 28, a widow herself, though she rarely mentioned it. She rode a bay mare and sat side saddle with perfect posture. "Mrs. Larson." She dismounted, approached the construction. "This is remarkable. You do not think it is foolish." Cordelia walked the perimeter, slowly studying the framework with intelligent eyes. "I think it looks like intention, like you know exactly what you are doing." She paused. "Though I confess I do not know what you are doing." And so Ingrid explained about dead air, about how moving air steals heat through something called convection, but trapped air holds warmth, about how the outer wall would take the wind's force while the inner wall sat protected in stillness. Cordelia listened without interrupting. When Ingrid finished, the schoolteacher nodded slowly. "You learned this from ice storage." "From my husband. He worked at the Bergen ice house. Double walls with sawdust between. It kept winter locked inside through July." "And you believe the principle works in reverse, that it can keep winter locked outside." "Physics does not change direction, Miss Hayes. Only application changes." Cordelia smiled then, a real smile, not the polite kind. "I keep weather records for the territorial government. May I document your results this winter, if there are results to document?" "Oh, there will be, one way or another." But most of the township did not share Cordelia's curiosity. They shared Silas Blackwood's skepticism. At the general store in late August, Ingrid overheard the conversations. She was purchasing nails when three homesteaders gathered near the stove speaking just loud enough to be heard. Widow's folly, they're calling it. Waste of good lumber, 12 inches of dead space around a perfectly fine cabin. Woman's got excessive worry in her. That's what happens when they try to homestead alone. Ingrid paid for her nails and left without comment. It was at the general store that she met Winona. The Lakota woman came in on a warm September morning carrying bundles of sewn goods, beaded leather pouches, quilted blankets with intricate patterns. She was perhaps 50, with grey threading through her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Winona set her goods on the counter and spoke to the storekeeper in practiced English. They negotiated briefly. Money changed hands. Then Winona gathered what remained unsold and turned to leave. Ingrid stepped forward. "Your blankets, they are beautiful." Winona stopped, studied her. "You are the woman building the double wall. You know about that." "Everyone knows. They laugh, but I do not laugh." "Why not?" Winona gestured for Ingrid to follow her outside. In the shade of the store's awning, she set down her bundles and crouched in the dust. With one finger, she drew two circles, one inside the other. "This is teepee. Outer hide catches wind, but inside we hang liner. Cloth walls this far from hide." She indicated a space of perhaps 8 inches. "Creates calm air between outer and inner. Traps warmth, stops drafts that make winter camps unbearable." Ingrid stared at the drawing in the dust. The principle was identical. Exactly identical. "Your people have done this for how long?" "Longer than anyone remembers. Since the beginning. And the white men never asked you how you stayed warm." Winona's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. White men do not ask. They tell. They were quiet for a moment. Around them the prairie wind moved through the tall grass, making it whisper and sway. "I would like to buy 2 of your blankets," Ingrid said, "for my cabin, and I would be honored if you would tell me more about the liner construction, how you ventilate them, how you prevent moisture buildup." Winona considered this. "You have something to trade. I have enough white man's money for today. I can sew, not as beautifully as you, but serviceable. If you have mending or if you need practical work done. You do not have much time before winter. You should be gathering fill for your double wall." "I can do both. I am Norwegian. We work efficiently." Something that might have been approval crossed Winona's face. "Then we trade. But I tell you, true Norwegian woman, your double wall is good thinking, same thinking my people used. But white men in this township will not like a woman proving them wrong, especially a widow woman with no husband to speak for her." "I know. And you build it anyway." "I have to. I lost my husband and son to cold in a single wall cabin. I will not let it happen to anyone else if I can prevent it." Winona picked up her blankets and handed 2 to Ingrid. "Then you are not building for yourself. You are building for memory. That is good medicine. I will help you." Over the next 3 weeks, Winona came by twice. She explained how the Lakota positioned their teepee liners to maximize the dead air space, how they left gaps at the top for smoke and moisture to escape, how they weighted the bottom with stones to prevent drafts from flowing underneath. The principles aligned perfectly with what Ingrid had learned from Henrik at the ice house. Different materials, different structures, same physics. As September turned to October, Ingrid began filling the 12-inch cavity. She cut prairie hay and spread it thin on drying racks to cure in the sun. She gathered moss from creek bottoms where it grew thick and green. Everything had to be dry, completely dry. Moisture was the enemy of insulation. The hay she cut short and loose, dense enough to trap air, light enough not to compact and settle. She calculated roughly 120 cubic feet of fill for the cavity around her cabin walls. She worked from dawn until dusk, cutting and drying and gathering. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. She did not stop. An elderly carpenter named Samuel Whitfield rode out in mid-September. He was 68 years old, with gnarled hands and sharp eyes. He walked the perimeter of her construction without speaking. Then he turned to her. "Your husband taught you ice house principles." "Yes." And you adapted them to this? Yes. He nodded slowly. It is good work, methodical. Your measurements are precise. He paused. But the town will not like it when you succeed. I know. Especially the men. They will not like being shown a better way by a widow woman. I cannot help what they like or do not like, Mr. Whitfield. I can only build what I know is right. He studied her face for a long moment. I have tools you might need. A good level, some clamps. You may borrow them. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. If this fails, they will blame me for encouraging you. If it succeeds, they will blame me for not building one myself 40 years ago. But did you have ice houses where you came from? Pennsylvania. No ice houses that I worked in. But I know good carpentry when I see it. And this is good carpentry. He left her the tools and rode away. By the first week of October, the mockery had settled into a steady rhythm. Every man in the township had an opinion about the fence around Ingrid Larsson's house. None of the opinions were favorable. At a township meeting on October 9th, Silas Blackwood stood and addressed the gathering. I want to speak about Mrs. Larsson's situation. Ingrid was not present. She was home tamping the last of the loose hay and moss into the wall cavity. But Cordelia Hayes was there taking notes for her territorial records. She told Ingrid about it later. Mr. Blackwood said you were wasting materials that could have gone to a proper barn or storage shed. He said the 12-inch gap between your walls was wide enough to walk through, and who needs that much dead space around a perfectly good log house? What else? He said that when the first hard freeze comes, your fancy fence will prove worthless. He said he would buy drinks for everyone at the next township gathering when you admit it was folly. Ingrid had continued her work without looking up. He is entitled to his opinion. Are you not angry? Why would I be angry? He believes what he believes, based on his experience. My cabin will speak for itself when winter comes. You are remarkably calm about this. I am tired, Miss Hayes. I have been working since April. I am not calm. I am simply too exhausted to waste energy on anger. But there was more to it than that. Ingrid had learned something in those terrible days after Henrik and Thomas died. Anger did not warm a cabin. Shouting did not seal a gap. Only work mattered. Only preparation mattered. The people of this township did not believe her. That was their burden to carry. She had carried her own burden for 2 years. She knew how heavy doubt could be, how it could crush you if you let it. She would not let it. By October 14th, the cabin was complete. Every cavity filled, every seam battened. The vestibule door hung true on its hinges. The muslin windchecks were tacked in place above the loose fill to prevent settling. The vent slots at the eaves breathed gently when she held her hand near them. For doors and windows, she had hinged the outer planks like shutters. They could swing open for access during mild weather but seal tight against the storms. The work had taken her from late June through mid-October, nearly 4 months. That was 6 weeks longer than most men needed to finish a cabin completely. She had no barn, no proper storage shed, no fences for livestock she did not yet own. Every resource had gone into this one structure, this double-walled cabin that the township called excessive and foolish. That night she lit her first fire in the completed cabin. She sat on the floor with her back against the interior log wall and felt the warmth settle around her like a blanket. Outside, the October wind blew cold across the plains. Inside, the air remained still, calm, protected. She thought of Henrik, of little Thomas, of that terrible December night when she had woken to find her son's skin like ice. I learned, she whispered to the empty cabin. I learned, and I will not forget. The fire crackled, the wind blew, and Ingrid Larsson waited for winter to test what she had built. The first snow came on October 15th. Not the testing snow, not yet, but enough to dust the prairie white and remind everyone that the killing season was coming. Ingrid woke early and checked her systems. The vent slots clear, the drainage gap draining, the outer shutters secure, everything ready. She walked to the general store for supplies and found a group of men gathered on the porch. They went silent when she approached. She nodded politely and went inside. Behind her, she heard their laughter start up again. Bet she freezes by Thanksgiving. Woman's gonna burn through her whole wood pile by December. Should have built a barn instead of that fortress. Cordelia Hayes was at the counter purchasing chalk for her schoolroom. She glanced at Ingrid with sympathy. Do not listen to them. I do not need to listen. I need to survive. They are different skills. You are very stoic. I am very Norwegian. Cordelia smiled at that. Then her expression turned serious. I've been watching the weather signs. The geese left early this year. 2 weeks earlier than last year. The woolly caterpillars have thicker bands. The horses are growing heavier coats. You think it will be a hard winter? I think it will be a terrible winter. The kind that kills people. Ingrid met her eyes. Then I am grateful my cabin is ready. So am I, Mrs. Larson. Because when that terrible winter comes, I believe your cabin might be the only truly safe one in this entire township. They stood quietly for a moment while the storekeeper wrapped Cordelia's chalk. Outside, the men's laughter had faded to murmurs. They will see, Cordelia said softly. When the storms hit, they will see. Perhaps they will find some other explanation. People often do. You think they will not believe even then? I think belief is complicated, Miss Hayes. I think people protect their pride very carefully. And admitting you were wrong costs more than most men want to pay. Even if the cost of being right is freezing to death. Ingrid pulled her shawl tighter. Especially then. She left the store and walked home across the prairie. The wind had shifted. Coming from the north now. Colder, more insistent. Above her, the sky stretched vast and grey. Somewhere in that greyness, winter was gathering its strength. She thought again of Henrik and Thomas, of the promise she had made over their graves. Never again. She had done everything she knew how to do, applied every principle Henrik had taught her, learned from Winona's people, built with Samuel Whitfield's tools and Cordelia Hayes's encouragement. Now there was nothing left but to wait, to let winter come, to let her cabin prove what words could not. The snow fell harder as she walked. By the time she reached home, the prairie had vanished beneath white. She went inside, closed the outer shutter, closed the inner door. The wind howled outside. Inside, the air remained still. She lit her fire and settled in to wait. Winter was coming to Dakota Territory, and Ingrid Larson was ready. The blizzard arrived without warning. October 15th, 3 hours past midnight. Ingrid woke to a sound she had not heard since Bergen. The wind did not howl. It screamed, a high terrible keening that seemed to come from the earth itself. She rose and went to the window. In the darkness, she could see nothing, but she could feel it. The violence in the air, the malevolence of moving cold. She lit a lamp and checked her fire, still burning low and steady from the banking she had done before bed. She added 2 logs and closed the stove door. Then she simply waited, listening to the storm announce itself. By dawn, 3 feet of snow had fallen. The wind drove it horizontal, creating drifts that reached the eaves of buildings and buried fence posts completely. Sustained winds of 35 miles per hour with gusts that bent young trees nearly double. And the cold. Temperatures had dropped to 14 below zero. Ingrid dressed warmly and opened her inner door. Then she opened the outer shutter. The storm hit her like a physical blow. Snow drove into the 12-inch cavity between her walls with furious force. But when she closed the outer shutter and returned inside, sealing the inner door behind her, the violence stopped. Inside, the air remained calm. She lit her lamp and took her first temperature reading. 6 in the morning as the grey dawn struggled through the storm. She had purchased a mercury thermometer from the Jamestown hardware store, specifically for this purpose. First, she opened the outer shutter again, just enough to place the thermometer against the interior surface of the outer plank wall at floor level. She waited 3 minutes. Then she retrieved it. 14 degrees below zero. The reading matched the thermometer she kept outside. Next, she placed the thermometer against the interior log wall, 3 feet from her stove. She waited, retrieved it. 7 degrees above zero, 21 degrees of difference. She wrote the numbers carefully in a small leather ledger. Date, time, both readings, the differential. Then she made coffee and sat by her fire, listening to the storm rage against walls it could not penetrate. 3 miles south, Silas Blackwood woke to a sound that made his heart sink. Ice cracking. Not ice on a pond or creek. Ice forming in the water bucket that sat 4 feet from his stove. He threw off his blankets and immediately regretted it. The air in his cabin felt barely warmer than the storm outside. His breath came in visible clouds. Frost coated the interior surface of his log walls, crystalline and thick. He stumbled to the stove. The fire had gone out sometime in the night despite his careful banking. The wood was good. The stove was good. But something about this storm was simply overwhelming his cabin's ability to retain heat. He rebuilt the fire with shaking hands, feeding it kindling until flames took hold. Then he added split logs, big ones, more than he would normally burn in an entire evening. The fire roared, heat poured into the cabin, and still the cold persisted. His wife Martha woke with their 2 sons, Jacob and Samuel. The boys were 8 and 6. They had slept in their coats. "Papa, I am cold," Samuel said. His lips had a faint blue tinge. "I know, son. Fire's going now. It will warm up." But it did not warm up. Not enough. Not nearly enough. By noon, with the stove burning hot enough that Silas worried about the chimney, the interior temperature had climbed to perhaps 25 degrees. His thermometer hanging on the wall confirmed it. 25 degrees inside, with the fire consuming wood at a rate that would exhaust their supply in weeks rather than months. The problem was not the fire. The problem was the wind. Every microscopic gap in his chinking, every tiny space between logs, every place where wood met wood, imperfectly, became a pathway for infiltration. Cold air forced in on the windward side, warm air sucked out on the lee. His cabin had become a bellows with the storm doing the pumping. 2 miles east at the Fletcher homestead, the situation was worse. William Fletcher was 72 years old. He had survived 7 Dakota winters, but each one took more out of him. His lungs were not what they once were. In cold air, he struggled to breathe. His son David had built their cabin well. Good logs, tight work, but tight was not airtight. And on a day like this, the difference mattered. William sat as close to the stove as he dared, wrapped in every quilt the family owned. His breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Each inhalation of frigid air made him wince. His daughter-in-law Emma moved around the cabin, trying to manage the fire, trying to keep her own children warm. Their daughter Anne, just 7 years old, huddled near the stove with wide, frightened eyes. But with every hour that passed, the cold seemed to press in harder. The interior walls wore a coating of frost. Their breath condensed on the logs and froze instantly, adding to the crystalline layer that made the wood itself feel colder to the touch. William coughed, a deep rattling sound that shook his entire frame. "Papa Fletcher, you need to stay warm," Emma said, though she did not know how to make it happen. "Trying girl, but this cold, it gets in the chest." He coughed again, and this time there was blood on his handkerchief. At the Sullivan cabin, 18-month-old Emma Sullivan had developed a cough in the night. By morning, it had worsened to a constant rattling wheeze. Her mother Mary held her close, trying to share body heat. But the child's lips had taken on a bluish tinge despite being wrapped in wool blankets. Patrick Sullivan burned wood at twice his normal rate, trying desperately to raise the interior temperature. But it remained stubbornly, dangerously cold. The baby's breathing grew more labored with each hour. Mary could hear fluid in her daughter's lungs. The sound terrified her. "Patrick, she needs warmth. Real warmth, not this." "I know, I am doing everything I can." "It is not enough." He had no answer for that, because she was right. Ingrid took her second reading at noon. She had kept her fire burning steadily, but not excessively. 2 logs added every 3 hours, nothing more. Outer wall at the sill, -6 degrees Fahrenheit. Inner log wall, 3 feet from the stove plus 15 degrees, 21 degrees of protection. Again, She recorded the numbers and added more hay to her fill in one spot where she thought it might have settled slightly. Then she made soup and ate it by her fire, listening to the storm's fury break itself against her outer wall. The wind could not reach her. The physics would not allow it. On the third day of the storm, Cordelia Hayes made her rounds. She was the school teacher, but school was closed during the blizzard. Instead, she checked on families, particularly those with elderly members or young children. She had a responsibility to document conditions for the territorial government and a personal commitment to making sure no one died in isolation. At the Blackwood cabin, she found Silas burning furniture. "I ran through my allocated firewood," he said, defensive and exhausted. "Had to burn something." The interior temperature was 40 degrees, with the stove glowing red hot. Martha and the boys huddled together under blankets. Little Samuel's fingers were white at the tips. "This is not sustainable, Silas. You think I do not know that?" Cordelia took measurements. She recorded temperatures. She documented fuel consumption. Then she rode to the Fletcher place. William Fletcher could barely speak. His breathing was so labored that each word cost him. Emma had moved him directly beside the stove, so close his clothes were in danger of catching fire. Still his hands remained too cold to grip a cup steadily. Young Anne watched her grandfather with tears streaming down her face. "He needs consistent warmth," Emma whispered. "Not heat and cold. Not this battle. Consistent warmth above freezing." "I know," Cordelia said. "I am documenting everything." At the Sullivan cabin, baby Emma's condition had worsened. The child could not stop coughing, could not catch her breath properly. Mary's face was hollow with fear. "She's going to die," Mary said flatly. "In this cold, she's going to die." Patrick stood by the window staring out at the storm with the expression of a man who had run out of options. Cordelia wrote it all down, every detail, every temperature, every symptom. Then she rode north to Ingrid Larsson's cabin. The contrast was immediate and undeniable. When Ingrid opened her outer shutter to Cordelia's knock, snow swirled into the 12-inch cavity with violent force. But when Cordelia stepped through into this cabin proper and Ingrid closed the inner door, the violence stopped completely. The cabin was not hot, but it was warm, genuinely warm. The kind of warmth that sank into your bones and made your muscles unclench. Cordelia removed her coat and stood for a moment, simply feeling it. "Mrs. Larsson, Miss Hayes, I did not expect visitors in this storm. I am checking on families. May I take some measurements?" "Of course." Cordelia worked methodically. She checked the interior temperature at multiple points. The water bucket, the walls, the air near the floor. Everything read above freezing. Most areas were in the low 40s to mid 50s. She examined the stove, checked the remaining firewood, calculated consumption rates. Finally, she looked at Ingrid. "You are burning approximately 40% less wood than your neighbors to maintain superior interior conditions. The double wall stops the wind from pumping heat out." "Yes, I understand the mechanism, but understanding it academically and seeing it demonstrated are different things." Cordelia opened her notebook. "May I see your temperature logs?" Ingrid handed her the leather ledger. Cordelia read through 3 days of paired readings. Every measurement showed the same result, a differential of 17 to 23 degrees between the outer wall surface and the interior log wall. "This is not luck," Cordelia said quietly. "This is applied thermodynamics. It is what my husband taught me, what I learned from the Lakota woman about teepee liners, what Samuel Whitfield's tools helped me build. The township needs to see this data. Will they believe it?" Cordelia closed the notebook and met Ingrid's eyes. Some will find reasons not to. Pride is a powerful insulator against truth." She paused. "But Mrs. Larsson, 3 families are in serious danger. William Fletcher's lungs are failing. Baby Emma Sullivan is developing pneumonia. The Blackwoods are burning their furniture and still the children are showing signs of frostbite." Ingrid felt the old grief stir in her chest. The memory of Thomas's frozen skin, What would you have me do? I do not know. I am only documenting. But I wanted you to know that your method works measurably, undeniably, and people are suffering because they did not build as you built. After Cordelia left, Ingrid stood by her window for a long time watching the storm. She had not built this cabin to prove anyone wrong. She had built it to keep herself alive, to honor the memory of her husband and son, to never let cold claim another life if she had the knowledge to prevent it. But knowledge unused was just information, and people were dying. The storm raged for 7 more days. On October 22nd, the wind finally began to ease. The snow stopped falling. Temperatures climbed slowly toward zero. Ingrid opened her outer shutters for the first time in a week. The cavity between her walls was packed with driven snow, but the inner wall showed no frost, no ice, no moisture damage. The system had worked exactly as designed. She took her final temperature reading of the first storm. Outer wall -2 degrees, inner wall +18 degrees, 20 degrees of protection. She recorded it in her ledger and closed the book. November 3rd arrived with the second storm. This one made the first seem gentle. The warning signs came in the afternoon. The sky turned a peculiar yellow-gray. The wind shifted suddenly to the north and began to build with terrifying speed. By nightfall, winds were sustained at 40 miles per hour, with gusts approaching 60. The temperature plummeted to 38 degrees below zero. This was the killing storm, the kind that killed people even when they thought they were prepared. Ingrid banked her fire carefully and settled in. She had enough wood, enough food, enough water stored inside. She could survive 2 weeks if necessary. But 3 miles away, people were running out of time. At 2:30 in the morning on November 4th, Ingrid woke to pounding on her outer shutter. She rose confused. No one should be traveling in this storm. It was suicide. The pounding came again, desperate, insistent. She wrapped herself in a shawl and opened the inner door. Then, carefully, she cracked the outer shutter. The wind tried to rip it from her hands. Silas Blackwood stood in the vestibule, snow-covered and shaking. Behind him, barely visible in the darkness, stood Martha, with both boys wrapped in blankets. Mrs. Larson, his voice was hoarse, broken. "I was wrong, please. My boys are freezing. I do not know what else to do." Ingrid did not hesitate. "Bring them in, quickly." She pulled the shutter wide. The Blackwood family stumbled through into the 12-inch cavity, then through the inner door into the cabin proper. The warmth hit them like a wave. Martha began to cry. Young Samuel was shaking so hard his teeth chattered audibly. Jacob's fingers were white and stiff. "Sit by the fire," Ingrid said. "Not too close at first. Warm slowly." Silas could not meet her eyes. "I would have let my boys die rather than admit I was wrong. What kind of man does that make me? The kind who is here now. That is what matters." She gave them hot water to drink, wrapped the boys in her blankets, built up the fire carefully, not too hot, not too fast. 20 minutes later, there was another knock. This time it was Rebecca Morgan, the midwife with the Fletcher family. William could barely walk. David and Emma supported him between them, their young daughter Anne following close behind, wide-eyed and frightened. "Mrs. Larson Williams' lungs are failing. He needs consistent warmth or he will not survive the night. Bring him in." Then came the Sullivans. Patrick carried baby Emma, whose breathing had become so labored that Mary was sobbing openly. "Please," Mary begged, "please help her." 11 people crowded into Ingrid's 14 by 18-foot cabin, and the cabin held them. The double wall system designed for one person proved capable of handling the increased load. Ingrid moved among them with quiet efficiency. She hung blankets to create privacy sections. She rationed her food supply. She maintained the fire at optimal levels, not wasteful, not insufficient. And most importantly, she taught. "The outer wall takes the wind's force," she explained to Silas as he watched her work. "Creates turbulence in the cavity. The inner wall sits protected in still air. Dead air does not conduct heat away.
Moving air pumps it out through every crack. She demonstrated with her pipe tobacco, blew smoke near the outer shutter. It disappeared immediately through invisible gaps. Then she blew smoke near the inner door threshold.
The smoke barely moved. See, the wind cannot reach the interior. Silas nodded slowly, and the loose hay and moss traps air in tiny pockets. Each strand creates a barrier to circulation. Moving air steals heat. Trapped air holds it. Like the ice houses you mentioned. Exactly like the ice houses. Same physics, different application. For 3 days, the storm raged. For 3 days, 11 people sheltered in Ingrid's cabin while their own homes became death traps. William Fletcher's breathing eased. The consistent warmth allowed his damaged lungs to function without fighting frigid air. Baby Emma stopped coughing. Her laser returned to healthy pink. She slept peacefully in warmth that allowed her small body to heal. The Blackwood boys thawed slowly, carefully. Their frostbitten fingers recovered without permanent damage, and Ingrid taught anyone who wanted to learn. On the fourth day, when the wind had died enough to allow movement, she explained the emergency retrofit. You cannot build a full double wall quickly, but you can create a wind barrier. She drew diagrams in the margins of her ledger. Lash plank screens or canvas 8 to 12 inches off your windward walls. The north and west faces primarily. Stuff the gap with loose straw from your barn reserves. Then hang blankets or muslin on the interior walls to limit drafts from the chinking. Will that be enough? Patrick Sullivan asked. It will not be as effective as a full cavity with proper fill, but it will stop the wind from pumping heat directly out of your cabin. It should raise your interior temperature 10 to 15 degrees in high winds. Why did you not tell us this before? Martha Blackwood asked, not accusatory, just genuinely confused. Ingrid was quiet for a moment. Would you have believed me? Martha had no answer. On the fifth day, the storm broke. Families prepared to return to their own claims. Silas approached Ingrid hesitantly. Mrs. Larson, I owe you an apology. Several apologies. I called your wall foolish. I bet against you publicly. I would have let my pride kill my family. You come here when it mattered. That is what I will remember. Still, I was wrong, completely thoroughly wrong. And you saved us anyway. What else would I do? He studied her face, trying to understand. Most people would have made us admit it, made us beg, made us feel as small as we made you feel. Most people did not watch their husband and child freeze to death. I did. I know what that cold can take. I will not let it take anyone else if I can prevent it, not even people who mocked me. She said it simply without drama or self-righteousness. Just fact. Silas held out his hand. Thank you. For my boys' lives, for my family, for teaching me instead of condemning me. She shook his hand. Go home, build your wind barrier, keep your family safe. That is thanks enough. One by one, the families left. They trudged through snow that came to their waists back to cabins that would be brutally cold until they could implement the emergency retrofits. But they left with knowledge, with measurements, with a method that could save their lives. Ingrid stood in her doorway and watched them go. The sun had emerged for the first time in days. The prairie sparkled blindingly white under clean blue sky. Inside her cabin was warm and calm. Outside, winter waited with infinite patience for the next storm. But the people of this township had learned something. Slowly, painfully, at the edge of death, they had learned that pride was expensive, that mockery was cheap, that a Norwegian widow knew things about survival that 7 Dakota winters had not taught them. They had learned that physics did not care about gender or experience or conventional wisdom. It cared only about wind and air and heat and barriers. And Ingrid Larson had built the right barriers. Spring came early to Dakota Territory in 1887. By late March, the snow had begun its retreat. Meltwater ran in rivulets through every coulee and draw. The prairie, dormant for months, showed the first hints of green, but the memory of winter remained. particularly among those who had felt how close death had come. On March 28th, Silas Blackwood appeared at Ingrid's door. He carried a notebook and a measuring tape. His expression was serious. "Mrs. Larson, I need your specifications." Ingrid was mending a quilt by the window. She set down her needle. "For what purpose?" "I am building a double wall on my cabin. Proper double wall, not the emergency retrofit. I need to know the measurements, gap width, picket spacing, everything." He paused and something like shame crossed his face. "I told myself this was for my brother-in-law. He's homesteading next year. But that is a lie. It is for me, for my family. I cannot go through another winter like that." Ingrid stood and retrieved her ledger from the shelf. She opened it to the pages where she had documented every measurement, every specification, every detail of the construction. 12-inch cavity minimum, cedar pickets at 36-inch intervals, ledger blocks every 48 inches to keep the frame true, 1 by 10 planks for the outer skin with 1 by 3 battens covering the seams, half-inch vent slots at the eaves for moisture escape. She walked him through the field requirements, the drainage gap at the base, the tin flashing for snow melt, the hinged shutters for doors and windows. Silas wrote everything down with the careful attention of a man who had learned the cost of dismissing information. "The fill material. You used hay and moss. Would sawdust work?" "It would work well. Bergen ice houses used sawdust. It stays dry longer than hay. Costs more initially, but needs replacement less frequently." "How much will this cost me?" Ingrid calculated quietly. "Approximately $40 in lumber and materials. Perhaps $50 if you use sawdust from the Jamestown mill. And it will save me how much in fuel? 35 to 40% reduction in wood consumption. Perhaps $12 per month in severe weather. You will recover your investment in one winter." Silas looked at the numbers he had written. Then he looked at Ingrid. "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my son's lives. But I cannot pay you for this knowledge. I spent my money on furniture I had to burn. I am not asking for payment. You should. This information is valuable. Information was only valuable if it saves lives. Take it. Build well. Keep your family safe. That is payment enough." After Silas left, others came. David Fletcher arrived next, asking for specifications to protect his father through another winter. Patrick Sullivan came 2 days later, desperate to ensure baby Emma would never struggle for breath in frigid air again. Ingrid gave each of them the same information, the same measurements, the same patient explanations. She charged nothing, asked for nothing in return. "Why are you doing this?" Patrick asked. "You could make good money consulting." "Because my husband and child died in the cold, and I swore over their graves that I would never let it happen to anyone else if I had the knowledge to prevent it. This is how I keep that promise." The men left with their notebooks full, with diagrams and calculations and hard-won wisdom from a Norwegian widow who understood physics better than their pride had allowed them to see. On April 15th, there was a township meeting. Ingrid did not attend. She was planting a kitchen garden and had no interest in public gatherings. But Cordelia Hayes attended. She always did. And she documented what happened. Silas Blackwood stood before the assembled homesteaders and spoke. "I want to address something publicly. Last fall, I bet against Mrs. Ingrid Larson. I said her double-walled cabin was foolish. I said it was a waste of good lumber. I said I would buy drinks for everyone when she admitted it was folly." He paused. The room was silent. "I was wrong, completely dangerously wrong. That woman's cabin saved my son's lives, saved William Fletcher's life." He gestured to William, who sat near the stove breathing easily for the first time in months. "Saved the Sullivan baby's life. On November 4th, I stood in a blizzard at 2:30 in the morning holding my freezing sons, and I knocked on her door. The door of the woman I had mocked. And she opened it without hesitation. She sheltered 11 people in a cabin built for one. She taught us the physics we had refused to learn. She gave us the specifications we had dismissed as excessive. I am building a double wall on my cabin. I urge every one of you to consider doing the same. Because Mrs. Larson's method is not theory. It is proven, measured, documented, and it works. He sat down. The room remained quiet for a long moment. Then, William Fletcher stood slowly, his breathing still a bit labored, but stronger than it had been. I am 72 years old. I have survived blizzards, droughts, plagues of locusts. But this winter almost killed me. The cold got into my lungs and would not let go. I was ready to give up. Then Mrs. Larson gave me consistent warmth, not heat and cold, not burning furniture to survive one more hour. Consistent warmth above freezing. My lungs healed. I am standing here because that woman understood something about survival that 7 Dakota winters had not taught us. He looked around the room. My son is building a double wall. I recommend you do the same. Unless you want to explain to your children why you let pride kill them. He sat down heavily. Then Mary Sullivan stood holding baby Emma in her arms. The child looked healthy now, pink-cheeked, bright-eyed. I do not have fancy words. I just know my daughter was dying. Her lips were blue. She could not breathe, and Mrs. Larson's cabin saved her. She sat down, and several other women nodded in agreement. Finally, Samuel Whitfield, the elderly carpenter, rose to his feet. I am 69 years old. I have built structures for 45 years. When I saw what Mrs. Larson was building, I recognized good carpentry, methodical work, precise measurements. I loaned her my tools because I knew she was doing it right. What I did not expect was that she would understand the physics better than any of us. That she would have learned principles from ice storage that we never thought to apply. That she would combine Norwegian knowledge with Lakota wisdom and create something that works better than anything we have built in this territory. He paused, letting that sink in. She is offering her specifications freely. No charge, no conditions, just teaching. If you are too proud to learn from a woman, that is your problem. But do not pretend it is about anything except pride. Because the physics do not care what you think. They only care whether you built the wall correctly. He sat down. Cordelia wrote it all in her notes. Every word, every testimony, she would include it in her report to the territorial government. A woman had solved a problem that men had simply endured, and slowly, painfully, the men were learning to listen. By May, 3 families had committed to building permanent double walls. The Fletchers began first. David chose a 14-inch cavity instead of 12. Reasoning that wider spacing would provide better insulation even if it cost more in materials. He used sawdust from the Jamestown mill, where it was available cheap as a waste product. The work took him through May and June. His father William supervised checking measurements and making sure the cavity remained consistent. Ingrid stopped by twice to verify that the vent slots were positioned correctly and that the fill material was properly tamped. "You are doing good work," she told David. "Learning from the best," he replied. The Sullivans built next, starting in early June. Patrick chose a 16-inch cavity, the widest of anyone in the township. He used a mixture of sawdust and moss, layering them to create what he hoped would be superior insulation. "Is it excessive?" he asked Ingrid when she visited to check his framing. "Excessive would be doing nothing and hoping your daughter survives another winter. This is preparation. There is a difference." The Blackwood construction began in July. Silas built exactly to Ingrid's original specifications. 12-inch cavity, cedar pickets, 1x10 planks. He followed her method, precisely measuring twice before every cut. His sons helped. Jacob and Samuel, 8 and 6 years old, carried lumber and held boards while their father nailed. They understood in the way children understand such things that this wall was being built because of them. Because their father had learned that pride was expensive and his sons were priceless. By August, all 3 cabins wore their double walls. The township landscape had changed. What had been mocked as one woman's folly was now becoming standard practice. And still Ingrid charged nothing, asked for nothing, simply checked each cabin's construction to ensure the principles were being applied correctly. "You could make a living as a consultant," Cordelia told her one afternoon. "The territorial government would pay you to inspect buildings, to write specifications for frontier construction." I do not need to make a living from this. I need people to survive. Those are different goals. You are remarkably principled. I am remarkably Norwegian. We have long memories and practical values. The second winter arrived in November 1887. This time everyone was watching. The township wanted to know if the double walls would prove themselves again or if the first winter had been anomaly and luck. Cordelia Hayes took it upon herself to document everything. She visited each double-walled cabin, weekly recording interior temperatures, fuel consumption rates, and family health outcomes. Her data was meticulous. At the Fletcher cabin, with its 14-inch cavity, interior temperatures during storms averaged 43 degrees Fahrenheit with moderate fire. Fuel consumption was down 38% compared to their pre-retrofit winter. William Fletcher survived the season without a single episode of lung distress. At the Sullivan cabin, with its 16-inch cavity temperatures, averaged 46 degrees during severe weather. Fuel savings reached 40%. Baby Emma thrived. No respiratory issues, no blue lips, no desperate nights wondering if she would survive until morning. At the Blackwood cabin, with its 12-inch Larson specification wall temperature held steady at 44 degrees during blizzards. Fuel consumption dropped 35%. The boys remained healthy throughout January's coldest weeks. No frostbite, no hypothermia, no burning furniture in desperate midnight hours. And at Ingrid's cabin, the original design continued to perform exactly as built. Consistent warmth, minimal fuel use, no failures, no surprises. The numbers did not lie. Cordelia compiled everything into a formal report. She sent it to the Territorial Education Office with copies to the Agricultural Extension Service and the Jamestown newspaper. By spring, the report was being circulated among county agents throughout Dakota Territory. The double wall method, developed by Norwegian immigrant Ingrid Larsen and proven through 2 severe winters, was officially recommended for high wind frontier regions. The method spread through informal networks first. At barn raisings, men discussed cavity widths and fill materials. During harvest cooperation, they compared notes on vent placement and moisture management. At the general store, homesteaders asked detailed questions about lumber requirements and construction timelines. Some built exactly to Ingrid's specifications. Others experimented with variations, wider cavities, different fill materials, alternative framing methods, but all of them followed the core principle, a sacrificial outer wall to catch the wind, dead air, trapped in fibrous material to prevent heat loss, and a protected inner wall where families could survive. Samuel Whitfield noted the changes during his rounds as the township's informal building inspector. 3 years ago, every cabin in this region was single wall. Now 20% have double walls. In 5 years, it will be 50%. In 10, anyone building single wall will be considered reckless. All because one Norwegian widow built something the men called foolish, Cordelia observed. All because one Norwegian widow was right, Samuel corrected, and gracious enough to teach instead of condemn. By 1890, the double wall principle had appeared in formal agricultural extension publications. The Dakota Farmer ran a detailed article in its March issue, complete with the diagrams showing proper cavity widths, fill densities, and ventilation requirements. The technique was described as particularly valuable in high wind regions where standard chinking cannot prevent infiltration during severe weather events. The article mentioned ice house principles. It referenced Plains Indian teepee liner construction. It provided measurements and material specifications. What it did not mention was that the entire method had been developed by a woman. That detail was quietly omitted. The article referred only to Norwegian homesteaders, in plural, generic, genderless. When Ingrid saw the article, she felt a flicker of something that might have been anger, but it passed quickly. They are building the walls, she told Cordelia. That is what matters. Whether they credit me is irrelevant. It is not irrelevant. You deserve recognition. I deserve to sleep at night knowing that families are surviving because of what Henrik taught me. That is the recognition I need. But locally, everyone knew. The homesteaders of the region did not need a magazine article to tell them who had solved the problem. They knew about the Larsen method. They knew about the widow who had faced down an entire township's skepticism and proven herself right through simple, undeniable physics. And they made sure their children knew, because that kind of courage and knowledge deserved to be remembered. Modern building science would later validate every aspect of Ingrid's original method. Dead air remains the fundamental insulating principle in contemporary construction. The R value, that measurement of thermal resistance, depends entirely on trapped air's inability to conduct heat. Moving air destroys thermal resistance. Still air provides it. Fibrous insulation materials from fiberglass to cellulose to modern spray foam all operate on the same principle Ingrid learned at the Bergen Ice House. They trap air in countless tiny pockets, preventing circulation and creating thermal barriers. Wind infiltration still overwhelms inadequate barriers. Modern building codes require air sealing and vapor barriers and continuous insulation. For the same reason, Ingrid built her double wall. Because physics has not changed. Wind still pumps heat out of poorly sealed structures. Dead air still stops it. The principles she borrowed from ice storage and adapted from Lakota wisdom became standard frontier survival knowledge within a decade. By 1900, double wall construction was common throughout the northern plains. Homesteaders adjusted cavity widths and fill materials to local conditions while maintaining the core principle. What had begun as one widow's excessive preparation became documented best practice for extreme climate construction. The method required more initial labor and materials than single-wall building, but the thermal performance and fuel savings justified the investment across multiple seasons. Families stayed warm. Elderly members survived winters that would have killed them in drafty cabins. Children grew up healthy in consistently heated homes. The numbers collected over years proved it conclusively. In 1920, Cordelia Hayes returned to Dakota Territory. She had retired from teaching 5 years earlier and moved to Minnesota to live with her sister. But she came back to see the old township one final time. She was 61 years old. Ingrid Larsen was 68. They sat together in Ingrid's cabin, the original double-walled structure that had started everything. The cabin showed its age. The outer planks needed rebattening. The cavity fill had been replaced 3 times, but the system still worked. After 34 years, it still kept the widow warm through Dakota winters. They preserved your cabin, Cordelia said. The Territorial Historical Society wants to maintain it as an educational example. That seems excessive. It seems appropriate. You solved a problem that killed people, and you did it by combining Norwegian knowledge with Native American wisdom and Bergen-Ice's storage principles. That is worth remembering. Ingrid was quiet for a moment, looking around the cabin that had saved so many lives. Do you know what I think about most? She finally said. Not the township meetings where Silas apologized. Not the families who built their own walls. Not even the magazine articles. What then? I think about Henrik and Thomas. About that terrible night in Bergen when I held my son's frozen body. About the promise I made that I would never let cold claim another life if I had the knowledge to prevent it. She paused, her hands folded in her lap. I kept that promise. For 34 years, I kept it. That is what matters. Cordelia nodded slowly. You know that 73 families across Dakota Territory built double walls using your method by 1892. That is documented. How many children survived who would have died? How many elderly lived to see grandchildren because you taught their families how to build correctly? I do not know. Hundreds, probably more. You changed how people built homes on the frontier. You proved that wisdom that does not require a man's voice to be valid. It just requires winter to test it. And your method survived every test. Ingrid looked out the window at the prairie beyond. The same prairie she had seen when she arrived in 1886. Still vast, still indifferent, still capable of killing the unprepared. But now, scattered across that prairie, dozens of homesteads wore double walls. They stood against the wind with physics on their side, with dead air protecting them, with principles borrowed from ice storage and teepee liners, and one Norwegian widow's refusal to let grief be meaningless. Henrik would be proud, she said quietly. Henrik would be astounded, Cordelia corrected. He taught you the principles, but you applied them. You faced down mockery and skepticism. You sheltered 11 people in a cabin built for one. You taught anyone who would learn. That was all you. They sat in comfortable silence, two old women who had witnessed and documented and survived the brutal frontier years. Outside, the March wind blew cold across the plains. Inside, the double-walled cabin remained calm and protected. The physics had not changed in 34 years, and they never would. Decades later, when building scientists analyzed historic frontier construction, they found the Dakota Territory double-wall method particularly interesting. It predated modern insulation technology by 60 years, yet operated on identical principles. The R value of Ingrid's 12-inch cavity, filled with loose hay and moss, was estimated at approximately R14 to R17, respectable by modern standards, exceptional for 1886. Her understanding of air-sealing vapor barriers and thermal bridging was remarkably sophisticated for the era. She had intuited principles that would not be formally codified until the mid-20th century. Modern building codes require continuous insulation and air barriers for the same reasons Ingrid built her double wall in 1886. Because physics is eternal. Because wind pumps heat out of poorly sealed structures. Because dead air stops the pumping. The method she developed became a case study in adaptive technology. How settlers combined knowledge from multiple sources. How women contributed to frontier survival through practical innovation. How one structure could change an entire region's approach to building. But the real legacy lived in simpler terms. Children grew up warm. Elderly members survived. Families endured. On the plains where wind never stopped testing what humans built against its force, Ingrid Larsson's method had taken the teeth out of winter before it could reach the wall where people lived. That was the legacy, not recognition in magazines, not credit in official documents, not fame or fortune or public acknowledgement. Just the survival, just warmth, just the quiet satisfaction of keeping a promise made over 2 graves in frozen Norwegian ground. Some wisdom does not need a man's voice to be true. It just needs winter to prove it. And winter had proven Ingrid Larsson right. With every blizzard that came after 1886, the double wall stood, the principles held, the families survived. That was enough. That was everything.